All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on our session, our Friday Eve session on connecting with students through feedback. So, my name is Heather Rotterman, and I am joined by one of my favorite colleagues at RISA, Dr. Laura Gabrion. And we're going to talk today about assessment and assessment. I have assessment on my brain. I'm an assessment consultant. But we're going to talk about feedback and the ways in which you can connect with your students through feedback. We just have some Zoom reminders. Feel free to mute your microphone. Sometimes it helps when you hear others with the speakers. Sometimes you get that feedback, actually, if we're not muted. Consider wearing headphones or earbuds. That also helps with the background noise. And then if we have a large group, sometimes it's better to save on bandwidth if we turn off our cameras. But make sure that you turn on your video if possible in the breakout rooms so you can see and connect with other colleagues from around our county.
Today, we're going to talk to you about just thinking about ways to connect with your students. We're calling them small moments, but you can call them any way that you take an opportunity to kind of connect with the identity of your students. How to build formative assessment and feedback around that. We've got a short role-playing video, and then we will break into breakout rooms to network and to kind of share some of the ideas that you're using currently. And then we'd love to hear about those when we bring you back from the breakout rooms. So our first part is just thinking about those small moments, how you can get to know your students. And what we want to do is a protocol called Think, Ink, and Share. I want you to just take a couple of minutes to pinpoint a significant moment in your life and what about that you remember, who was involved, what the context was, and whether the impact was positive or negative. So just take a couple of minutes to jot down your thoughts. And we'll put the timer on for about 2 minutes. We're just right at that 2-minute mark. So we would just love to hear from any of you if you want to unmute and share or throw your thoughts into the chat, either way. Got a side group. Heather, do you want to share yours and get people started?
Yeah, I was going to say this is the power of wait time, and wait time in a virtual space feels very, very different and quiet than it does in a classroom. My small moment was about being accepted into several different colleges and universities in the fall of my senior year of high school. And it was really a significant part of my life. I knew I wanted to be a teacher since I was very, very young, but this provided me with an opportunity to be selective about which teacher prep program fit my needs as a learner, and somebody that knowing that I was going to commute to school. So those were some of the things that were kind of important to me at the time. But I would say like having that pick, like being able to be selective about which program would fit my needs and I would work best for me. So I would say that the people that were involved were my parents and the counselor at school. And I had several teachers that I could point to as well that were impactful, and it was definitely a positive impact.
Great. And if anyone else wants to share or even talk about a way, I see becoming a mom. Yeah, definitely. Oh, and happy birthday early to your daughter as well. Yeah, these, those little bits of our identity are tied in with these small moments. And that's really what we wanted to get at with it is whether it's a journal or a conversation or a poster that your students are making or writing a literacy narrative or whatever it is, how can you get to know some aspect of that student's identity, build that trust so that you can make feedback more interactive, the student knows that you're behind their best interest.
So one of the things that when Laura and I were doing some research around this idea of how we connect with our students through feedback is that strong teacher-student relationships were associated in both short and long-term improvements on practically every measure that schools care about. And so really we know this to be true as practitioners, right? We know how important relationships are. But we also found that because of those school closures, that teachers really had to learn how to recreate those connections that were essentially fostered in a face-to-face environment in that new digital space. And so one natural way that we can promote relationships between teachers and students is through the feedback process. And so when this process or cycle is integrated into the formative assessment process, whether it's delivered synchronously or asynchronously, can provide students with opportunities for individual growth, including the development of skills and self-efficacy. And so the connection to formative assessment and feedback, it's really quite natural. When we situate it inside the formative assessment process, it's really about moving students forward. So we're providing that descriptive, actionable feedback that moves students in the direction of mastering those learning targets or being proficient in those learning targets. And so when we talk about what feedback is, um, we want it to be an opportunity for students to make adjustments or changes to their work or their task. We also want to make sure that we're providing specificity to the learner about what needs to be improved or changed. And this is sometimes in the form of a question. Sometimes we can ask a question, give the student something to think about, and then come back to that student. And then lastly, feedback really provides a pathway for students to take actions. And this means that students know how to use that feedback or they have developed a feedback literacy. And so some of the things that feedback isn't, um, it's not a grade or a score or a percentage like 15 out of 20 or 68%. It's not a generic comment like good job or you did it or nice try. And it really, we don't want to over give feedback either. Like we don't want the feedback to do the thinking for the student. We still want the student to be an owner of their learning and have to make some decisions about the feedback that is provided to them and how they go about changing their work. So in practice, when we're thinking about small moments, we really want to listen and internalize that small moment. So what did the student share with us? Like I shared about my college acceptance experience, and consider ways that we might connect those feedback pieces to that small moment. And when we figured out how to do that, then we can deliver that feedback to the student. And so what we're doing is we're pointing out the strengths in the work and providing that just right, or we call it the Goldilocks principle, that just right amount of feedback around the things and pieces that need the most significant revision, which is also aligned to the learning targets. And then we want to make sure that we provide our students with sufficient opportunities to engage with that feedback as it relates to their work.
So what we're going to show you next is a short video that illustrates tying in those small moments to the feedback opportunity. We used video conferencing, so we were trying to be cognizant of the fact that in many cases this might need to be the mode of the delivery of that feedback, but also keeping in mind, the identity pieces that student had given earlier, and using that to kind of cultivate that trust and look for a way to, as Heather, it always rings in my ears, moving students learning forward. You want to, you want to think about, well, how can I use all of the tools at my disposal to make that happen? Hi, Aubrey. How's it going? I'm so glad that we have time to have a conference today. Well, I don't know if you remember, but you wrote in your journal that you really love school and you love your teachers and socializing with your classmates, and you also love making crafts. And I just learned too that you love gymnastics. So if we're going to look at this paper that you wrote, almost everything except gymnastics is in it. So it was probably your perfect day. Yeah? All right. I'm going to show you your paper. So let's look at your paper together. Do you remember when you were writing this draft? It was kind of all about dialogue. Do you remember that? Yeah? All right. So what I was going to ask you is there anything you think you did really, really well with this? When people were, I remember that you thought, boy, I nailed this.
Like those things by when people were talking and paragraphing.
I was going to tell you the same thing. I think that not only did you do a really good job setting this up in the paragraph to go along with dialogue, but what I really liked is it sounded like real people were talking. I didn't think, oh, she kind of made this up. It felt like I was listening to a conversation. Can you think of anything that you wish you had done a little bit better for this draft?
Yeah, I wish I would have done like the 5 or 10 weeks later, like in paragraph 2. That's all.
I thought about the same thing. I thought it sounds so cool to me that you were getting ready to see your teacher in Zoom, and then she had to go on a teacher call, so you kind of all had to hang up. But then 5 weeks later, teacher says she's so happy to see all of your nice faces. But I thought, I wonder if 5 weeks later they came back to school face to face. Because it sounds like you were going to be doing crafts and painting, and later you had your dad pick you up. So I think up here, it would make sense if you added a little more detail so your reader would know that you were back in real school, not on Zoom. Can you think of anything else you would have maybe changed?
No.
Well, I thought of one more thing, and that's capital letters. So, like in this, in a couple of your dialogue, pieces, you've got a capital letter leading into that, but sometimes you didn't. So you want to remember that just like a sentence, you'll always start with a capital letter and you'll always end with some kind of punctuation. So whether it's a period or an exclamation point or question mark, you want that on both sides. That makes sense? All right. Well, what we're going to do now is I'm going to have you put these together in what we call the Google task. So if you look at this Word document or this Google document, you'll see way over on the right-hand side, there's a little, looks kind of like a little pencil with a dot above it. We're going to click on it, and that lets us have some itemized tasks that we could do that you can work through your revisions with without me, but you can always ask me if you're getting stuck on something. So one of the things that we talked about today was add details, right? So you're going to add a few details and spots so that your reader understands how this is a difference. You've moved from Zoom to face, and as the day ends, your dad's going to pick you up after this amazing, perfect day. And the other thing that we're going to do is make sure that we added capital letters and end marks to the dialogue. So when anybody's talking, you want to start with a capital letter and then you'll end with a period, exclamation point, or question mark. So then what happens is you're working on your paper. When you get done with your task, you're just going to click that little check mark and then it's going to disappear. So you know that you finished your task, all right? Does that sound like a good plan?
Mhm.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you get going on your revisions for this paper. But like I said, if you have questions, you can always say, you know, Mrs. Gabriel, I just didn't understand how to add more details. What do you think? And I'll look it over again and we can talk about it again. Sound like a plan? So one of the things that I was hoping that we could, again, unmute and share or talk about briefly before we get into those let's breakout rooms is what you observed, what you might wonder about, maybe something you're using. For example, I used Google Tasks in this video, but Google Keep would work just as well. And you can add, an itemized list. You can add a collaborator so you can share that with a student. Again, anything that you noticed, observed, had questions about, feel free to either add that to the chat or unmute and share. And then we'll get you onto those breakout rooms.
I really like how the teacher asked the student, how were you feeling and what were you doing when you wrote this? So it kind of helps the student get back to like the setting and the mind frame that they were in when they initially started this.
Yeah, and I think too, I'm sure all of us have been engaged in feedback in different ways. What I've found personally is one-on-one conferences is my best mode. And I think it's definitely helpful to the students. But what I do also know about it is that I always have to prep ahead and think about those things that I want to say to that student. So, for example, one method I use quite often in classes that I teach is screencasting, but it doesn't take away that front loaded part of it where I have to like think about what exactly I want to, whether I highlight little areas or I throw something in the comments. I always know I have to prep ahead for that. And I don't know if all of you have encountered that as well. I just know that no matter what way we slice it, feedback takes time. We can't seem to, make it shorter. It just doesn't work.
I think the other thing to consider too, Laura, just like what you were saying, it does take time, but it's not a one size fits all either. So, like what Laura provided to the student was a just right amount for this student. Another student might be able to take on more feedback, and then you have students that might be able to do one piece at a time. So it really just it's building that relationship with your student and really capitalizing on those small moments as an inroad into having a conversation.
That made me think too that depending on the age of the student, sometimes I've had them come with a list of like 2 or 3 questions or ideas that they want to work on. I always tell my older students, you're writing Achilles heels, you know what you struggle with. So what is it that you're worried about? And often I find that my list and their list, just like it did in this instance, were the same. I noticed the same things that the student noticed. So sometimes you can offer that as an opportunity for engagement too. Well, we don't want to cut you short for your networking time, but is there anything else that you noticed or wondered about or had questions about that we can answer before we send you into some time with each other? All right, Heather, Heather's gonna take care of getting you into breakout rooms, and we're gonna have you in there for about 20 minutes. You'll have plenty of time to talk through some strategies, what's working, what's not, and then we'll bring you back together to share those if you feel comfortable doing so. I think there was also, we wanted to, Heather, could you throw in the digital tools? We've created 2 different handouts that may or may not help you. I know that we've all been in these digital realms for almost a year right now, but one is with Google and one is with Microsoft. So basically they're the same tools. It's just that particular platform's take on it. So for example, we just looked at Google Tasks, and Microsoft has Microsoft To Do, and it works very similarly. So if you're working with one or the other, kind of suite, you do have some options, and these might give you some strategies if you're not already using them. All right. Well, Heather, as soon as you're ready, we can have you whisked away into breakout rooms.
All right. Give me 1 second.
Welcome back, everyone. I thought we'd just give you a minute to look at the questions that can frame our discussion as we finish up for today. But we thought, how might you use small moments to connect with your students? And how could this facilitate the feedback process? I'm going to think about those for a second, and then I'm going to stop sharing our screen so we can see each other and have a conversation, a virtual conversation before we leave for the day. Would anyone like to unmute and share what your group talked about? Or Lisa,
I can
please.
share a bit. I think especially with those small movements, and something we've really been trying to connect with here in our building is having students connect with their own learning or seeing themselves in their learning. So as you were showing the video with the feedback and making that connection with the student's own personal experience, you could see that student light up because they're talking about them. They are part of their curriculum. And I think when students are able to connect with themselves or see themselves in their learning, you see the engagement increase significantly. So as you make those connections and build upon them and keep that learning moving forward, I just really liked how those personal connections played a role in that.
Yeah, I think they need to feel valued for who they are and what they bring. Because there's going to obviously be in any learning strengths and weaknesses. But I think if you only focus in on those weaknesses, you've already kind of lost the battle. Then they feel like sometimes it's insurmountable to kind of conquer that.
Right. And what student doesn't like to celebrate some progress? They all love having something good or that gold star, like, oh, you did this.
So true. Anyone else from your group or from your own experiences, anything that you'd like to share?
Okay, there we go. So my camera has been like on and off. I'm at the building, so it's like glitching. So if it turns off, I apologize. I don't know if you can see me. I'm like glitching really bad. So we were just kind of talking about a variety of different things, but like my video is going crazy. I'm just gonna turn it off so you guys don't get crazy. So I had a moment that I was gonna share earlier when you guys asked about like a specific moment. and this has stayed with me. I am a new teacher. This is only my second year, so this is a little bit different, obviously, and crazy. But last year when I had a student who was ELL, and at the time I didn't know it because I had just came in the class, and I was teaching a lesson, and I looked at a student and he was crying, and I didn't know what was going on. And the other student told me he can't understand. He's ELL, and I didn't know at the time. And it really stuck with me seeing that a student was upset because they couldn't understand. So what I was able to do is learn additional strategies to help him. So having a student translate for me, or having the cooperating teacher translate for me. And just that moment just made me feel that I wanted to accommodate to just everyone in any way that I could, because seeing that student upset and knowing that it was from me, even though I didn't know why he was upset. So that moment has constantly stuck with me, and how I can create special moments with my kids and not making them feel that they're lost, or not making them feel like, oh, I don't understand, but she doesn't know that they don't understand, So asking those questions. And I like in the video how you were saying, like, well, what would you do first, to see what she thought? And then you like kind of shared your own ways of like, well, I noticed this. And so that way they can kind of understand, well, this is how I can look at my work from a different perspective. I don't know if I'm making any sense or if I'm just blabbing, but but that's just kind of my moment that I thought about, and just making sure that all the students know that they're comfortable and that they, feel special in their own way. Okay, I promise I'm done. Sorry.
I think that's Haley, you make a really good point of like making sure that we connect with all of our students, not just because we know the research says it's good. And as practitioners, we know we get more out of our students when they're connected and they feel safe and loved in their classroom community. But thinking about, in the video, like how much farther that feedback is going to go, because, the student really felt that Laura cared and was talking to them, and it was all about her writing and all about her. So she's going to take that feedback and use it so that she can come back and have another conversation with Laura about her writing.
Yeah, and that's why I've been having a difficult time with virtual, as I wish I could have more of those conversations instead of being like, oh, if they turn in a paper online, I wish I could just write so much all over it to have that conversation instead of saying, good job, you did great, good. Like that doesn't give anything. I like to have those, conversations of how they could make those changes with themselves. What do they see? So when we are able to finally, because we've been virtual all year. So finally, I'm excited to be in person so I can actually have that one-on-one instead of like, thumbs up, you get a star, I mean, they like it, but I would rather have more of a more, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, good conversation, I guess, meaningful, I guess.
Did you have an opportunity to explore or look at any of the digital tools on the sheets that we dropped in the chat?
Yeah, I made a copy of it. I'm going to plan to look at that.
There's some digital tools that can record. So if you can't make time feedback does take time too. And that's why you have to be really like strategic about which pieces to give, because we don't have an endless amount of time.
Right.
But even thinking about ways that it can be delivered, like if you use digital tools like Vocaroo or, Courtney, we can send those again. I'm trying to think of the other ones. Mote is another one if you're a Google district, but you can record your comments to the student, and then the student can actually hear you instead of having it necessarily typed out or written out like in the margins on a Google Doc or,
okay.
And that actually they found recently, Laura and I stumbled upon the research that students are more likely to take on the feedback from an audio comment because they can hear like those inflections in your voice and your tone. And you know how sometimes when you read text message, you're like, what does this mean? Or an email and you're like, ooh, I don't know how to interpret that. But they can actually hear those nuances in your voice. So they're able to then kind of apply that feedback, even if you can't have like the face-to-face and the synchronous moment like Laura had with the student.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of our district has something called Raz Kids, and it's a reading program. And this actually allows a student to record themselves reading, and you can actually hear how they're reading the book. And so I'm able to listen to it, and then I can provide the audio feedback to them in their reading. And okay, we're reading this sentence this way, but and so like giving that audio feedback. So that's why I was trying to find something like as kids so I can give it feedback in math and like other subjects. So thank you.
And to, screencasting is a wonderful tool. Screencastify is free. Screencast-O-Matic is free. So those are another way. But I can't kind of emphasize enough the point that Heather made that it's got to be doable. I don't know about you. I've been an educator for a long time, but my first years giving feedback, I gave kids way too much to focus on, and they were so overwhelmed, and they didn't know which thing to address first. So a lot of times they took the easiest things to address first, which really weren't impactful to the written piece or the reading piece itself. So I would say, my kind of rule of thumb is top 3 to 5. Especially if there's a short turnaround time. Yeah, I agree, Heather. If we mark up the whole thing, we've overwhelmed them and if you took the opportunity to build the trust, now you're starting to kind of chip away at it. But others, anyone else who wants to share things that are working, things that you might try, ways that you're building those moments with your students?
I think one of the last pieces, little nuggets of information that we can leave you with on a beautiful Thursday Eve or Friday Eve is that feedback really has a profound impact on students when we engage in it and as a regular cycle, and it's free. Like we're not paying for a program. We're able to do that and engage with our students and connect with them in a different way. So just something to consider as you round into Friday.
It's been great sharing some time with all of you. And I hope the digital tools that we've shared are useful to you in some capacity. We tried to give you, purpose behind some of them, as well as the tool itself and some tutorials that we've been able to stumble upon or we have created ourselves. So hopefully there's something in that batch of tricks that works well for you and your students. But we're always happy to, get back to the drawing board and tackle some issue that you're currently encountering with your students. We're always happy to do that. So thank you again on this Friday Eve. I've learned a new phrase, and enjoy your afternoon.
Bye, everyone. Pleasure to be with you all this afternoon.